A 7-year-old boy standing alone in a Chicago blizzard. A mafia boss who hasn't felt anything in years. One whispered sentence that broke something open inside the most dangerous man in the city and set off a chain of events that would cost him everything he built and give him the only thing that ever mattered. If this story pulls you in, hit like and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The blizzard hit Chicago the way bad news always does, without warning and without mercy. By 9 o'clock on a Tuesday in February, the wind was tearing down Michigan Avenue at 40 miles an hour, ripping signs off storefronts, sending garbage cans skidding across black ice like drunk men looking for a fight. The temperature had dropped to 11 degrees and was still falling. The city, which prided itself on toughness, on surviving things that would flatten softer places, had largely surrendered to the cold. Streets that usually hummed with traffic sat empty. Restaurants had closed early. Even the homeless had found corners and tunnels and shelter house doorways anywhere to get out of the wind. The city looked like it had been evacuated. Almost. Kang Min-jae came out of the Meridian Tower at 9:17, buttoning the top button of his wool overcoat as he pushed through the revolving glass door and stepped into the full force of the storm. The cold hit him like a fist to the jaw, immediate and serious. He didn't flinch. He had grown up poor in South Korea, in a building with heating that worked maybe 4 months out of the year. Cold was an old conversation. He knew how to have it. Behind him, 2 of his men, Park Dae-won and a newer guy everyone called Sketch, because of the prison tattoos climbing up the left side of his neck, fell into step a few feet back. They always kept that distance in public, close enough to move fast if something happened, far enough to look like they weren't together. It was a habit. In 20 years of living the way Min-jae lived, habits were the only thing that kept men alive. The Meridian Tower meeting had lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of negotiating with Victor Sorokin's people over distribution territory on the south side. 4 hours of reading faces across a conference table and deciding who was lying and who was scared and who was calculating the odds of moving on him before the year was out. Sorokin himself hadn't shown, which was a statement, and not a subtle one. His representative, a flat-faced man named Dimyon who wore too much cologne and kept touching his watch, had done most of the talking. Min-jae had done very little, which always made the other side nervous. Silence, in his experience, was the most efficient form of pressure. Let a man fill the quiet long enough and he'll tell you everything you need to know about what he's afraid of. They had reached an agreement. Barely. The kind of agreement that would need to be renegotiated in 3 months, maybe less, because Sorokin's organization was fracturing at the edges, and desperate organizations did desperate things. Min-jae had noted that and filed it away the same way he filed everything. Quietly, completely, without showing that he'd noticed. His car, a black Escalade with tinted windows and plates that were changed twice a month, was supposed to be waiting at the south end of the block. He could see it from here, exhaust curling up white into the black cold sky, wipers beating against the snow that was accumulating fast on the windshield. He started toward it. The train station was on his left. The Blue Line stop at Washington, the entrance set back from the sidewalk under a shallow concrete overhang that provided maybe 2 feet of shelter from the weather. Most nights there would be commuters here, people moving in and out with their heads down, chasing warmth. Tonight, it was empty. Almost. Min-jae caught the shape in his peripheral vision, the same way he caught most things, without looking for it, without meaning to, his mind processing the visual information before he consciously registered it. Someone small. Someone not moving. Standing at the railing near the station entrance, half hidden in the shadow under the overhang, bundled in a coat that was clearly inadequate for the kind of night this was. He kept walking. Around him, on the other side of the street, 2 people who'd been pushing against the wind had already passed the station without slowing. That was Chicago in February. You kept your head down and you got where you were going, and you didn't make other people's problems. Your problems because the city would eat you alive if you stopped for everything that looked like trouble. Min-jae had lived by that same logic for 20 years. He was 12 feet past the station entrance when he stopped. He didn't know why. He would think about it later, lying in the dark of his penthouse bedroom, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment, and he still wouldn't be able to name the exact thing that stopped him. Maybe it was the stillness of the small shape, the complete absence of movement that was wrong in a way the moving shapes hadn't been. People in the cold moved. They shifted their weight, they pulled their coats tighter, they stamped their feet. They moved because staying still and cold like this was dangerous. A person that still was either unconscious or had given up. He turned around. Park Dae-won, who had been with Min Jae for 11 years and had learned to read shifts in his body language the way other people read weather, stopped the moment Min Jae did. Sketch bumped into Park's shoulder, then caught himself and straightened, scanning the street out of reflex. "Boss?" Min Jae didn't answer. He walked back to the station entrance and looked at the small shape standing at the railing. It was a child. A boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with a dark face and close-cut hair, and eyes that were open and looking at the street with an expression that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite calm. He was wearing a blue winter coat, a child's coat, the kind with cartoon characters on the zipper pulls, but it wasn't thick enough for this weather by a wide margin. His hands were bare. He wasn't wearing a hat. He had a small backpack over his shoulders, the kind children carried to school, with a cartoon hero on the back whose name Min Jae didn't know. The boy looked at Min Jae. Min Jae looked at the boy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind came through and hit them both. The boy shivered, a full-body shiver that ran through him like a current, but he didn't look away. "Where's your mother?" Min Jae asked. His English was precise, slightly accented, each word placed with care. He had learned English at 22, after he'd already learned that language less important than the ability to make people believe you understood more than you were saying. The boy's jaw tightened. He was trying not to cry. Min Jae could see it, the way the muscles in the boy's small face were working against the emotion, and something about the sight of it, the sheer effort of a 7-year-old trying to hold himself together in a February blizzard, hit Min Jae in a place he hadn't been hit in a long time. "She didn't come home," the boy said. His voice was barely audible over the wind. Min Jae stood there. Behind him, Park and Sketch were still there, maintaining their distance, saying nothing. Somewhere on the street, a car horn cut through the storm. The wind picked up, harder now, and the snow came sideways for a few seconds before settling back. "How long?" Min Jae asked. The boy thought about it. He was trying to count it out, Min Jae realized, actually trying to calculate the time. "She went to work yesterday," he said, "in the morning. She was supposed to be home for dinner, yesterday morning." Min Jae looked at the boy, at the bare hands and the inadequate coat, at the backpack, at the dark circles under the child's eyes that said he hadn't slept, at the stillness that said he had been standing here for a very long time, maybe not tonight alone, maybe yesterday too, waiting for a mother who hadn't come. He looked at the street. He looked at the car idling at the end of the block. He looked back at the boy. "What's your name?" he asked. "Malik," the boy said. "Malik Carter." The name of the hospital came out in pieces, the way information comes from a child. Not in sequence, not efficiently, but eventually. Malik's mother's name was Naya. She was a nurse. She worked at Chicago General, which was a 20-minute drive south and west of where they were standing. Malik had tried calling her phone. It went to voicemail. He had tried calling his neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Petrakis, who sometimes watched him, but Mrs. Petrakis hadn't answered either, and Malik didn't have any other numbers because all the numbers were in his mom's phone, and his mom's phone wasn't answering. He had waited at the apartment until that morning. Then he had taken the train because he didn't know what else to do, and he thought maybe if he went to the place where she worked, someone there would know something. He had gotten this far, and then the storm had gotten worse, and he hadn't been able to make himself go back into the station. Min Jae listened to all of this standing in the entrance of the Blue Line station, with the wind throwing snow against both of them. He didn't interrupt. He didn't hurry the boy along. He just listened, the same way he listened in negotiating rooms, with his full attention, letting the full picture assemble itself. When Malik was done talking, Min Jae was quiet for a moment. Then he shrugged off his overcoat. It was a Brioni coat, black wool, custom-tailored, cost more than most people made in a month. He draped it around Malik's shoulders without explanation or ceremony, and the coat swallowed the boy completely, falling past his knees, the shoulders dropping down his arms, but it was thick and warm and it would keep the wind off. Malik looked up at him through the cloud of overcoat with an expression that was hard to read. Suspicious. Uncertain. But underneath that, something desperate enough to accept help from a stranger in the dark. "We're going to the hospital," Min Jae said. It wasn't a question. He walked back to the Escalade. Behind him, after a moment's hesitation that Min Jae could feel without seeing, Malik followed. Park opened the rear door without being asked. He'd worked for Min Jae long enough to know when explanations were going to come later, and this was one of those times. He looked at the child wrapped in the boss's coat, and he looked at Min-jae, and he said nothing at all, which was the correct response. Min-jae got in. Malik got in beside him, sitting very straight, the overcoat bunched around him, the cartoon backpack in his lap. "Chicago General," Min-jae said. The driver pulled into the street. The hospital's emergency entrance was lit up harsh and white against the dark and the snow. Ambulances sat along the curved driveway, their emergency lights cycling without urgency. Inside the automatic doors was the controlled chaos of a city hospital on a bad weather night. People waiting in plastic chairs, a television in the corner showing news that nobody was watching, nurses moving between stations with the efficient economy of people who had been doing difficult things for a long time. Min-jae walked in with Malik at his side. Park stayed with the car. Sketch came in and took a position near the entrance without being told, hands in his pockets, watching. The woman at the reception desk looked up at Min-jae, looked at Malik in the oversized coat, and looked back at Min-jae with the expression of someone who had seen enough unusual things tonight already that she was prepared to be patient. "Nia Carter," Min-jae said. "She works here. She's a nurse. She's been missing since yesterday morning." The receptionist's expression shifted. Something in it closed. "Are you family?" "No." "Then I'm not able to, This is her son," Min-jae said. "He's been alone since yesterday morning. He was standing in a blizzard when I found him." He kept his voice even, not aggressive, just precise. "I need to know if she's here and what her condition is." The receptionist looked at Malik. Malik looked back at her. He had pushed the overcoat's collar down so his face was visible. He looked exhausted and scared and very young, and those things were not things that could be argued with. The woman picked up her phone. There was a wait. 10 minutes. Then a woman in hospital administrator's clothing came through a set of double doors and introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Hale, Patient Relations Director. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and the practiced neutrality of someone whose job was managing situations that had already gone wrong. She looked at Min-jae, then at Malik, then at Min-jae again. "You found him?" she said. "At the Blue Line station on Washington," Min-jae said. "Blue Line, standing in the open. He's been out since this morning, maybe longer." Dr. Hale crouched down to Malik's level. "Malik, honey, my name is Dr. Hale. Do you know what hospital this is?" "My mom works here," Malik said. "That's right, she does." Dr. Hale looked up at Min-jae. "Can I speak with you privately?" They moved to a corner of the waiting room while a nurse took Malik to a separate area. Malik went, but he looked back at Min-jae twice, which Min-jae noted and filed. Dr. Hale's practiced neutrality didn't slip, but her voice dropped. "Nia Carter was brought in yesterday afternoon," she said. 12-hour shift, she collapsed in the break room. Severe pneumonia. Double pneumonia, actually. She's in the ICU. Min-jae absorbed this without changing his expression. "Her condition? Serious. She's on oxygen. She has a fever that's been difficult to control. She's conscious, but not consistently." A pause. "She's been asking about her son." Min-jae looked across the waiting room to where Malik had been taken. Through the partial wall, he could see the boy sitting in a chair while a nurse offered him something. Juice, probably. Something warm. And Malik was taking it with both hands. "What happens to him?" Min-jae asked. "That's what I need to discuss with you." Dr. Hale kept her voice professional, but there was something underneath it, something that wasn't comfortable with what she was about to say. "Malik doesn't have extended family in Chicago. His mother's emergency contact is an aunt in Memphis who says she's unable to come. If we can't arrange appropriate supervision within the next..." She paused, chose her words. "The hospital is required to contact the Department of Children and Family Services." Min-jae was quiet. The ICU was somewhere through those double doors, and in it a woman who had gone to work and collapsed and hadn't been able to get word to her son, and her son had spent nearly 30 hours alone in an apartment before taking a train to a city hospital in a blizzard because a 7-year-old's logic said that's where she would be. "I'll take him," Min-jae said. Dr. Hale looked at him. The professional neutrality was still there, but something behind her eyes had shifted to something sharper, more evaluating. "Mr. Kang, Min-jae Kang." Whatever she'd been expecting him to say, it hadn't been that. She processed it. Min-jae watched her process it. The name, what came with the name, the context of who he was in this city. He had enough legitimate business holdings that his name appeared in newspapers in ways that weren't always about what he was. Real estate, import, a restaurant group, a logistics company. He existed in two worlds, and people who encountered him in one didn't always know about the other, and people who knew about the other sometimes preferred to pretend they didn't. Mr. Kang, Dr. Hale said carefully, you're not family. You're not a licensed foster. I understand the legal position, Min-jae said. I'm telling you what the alternative is, and I'm telling you I'm able to provide supervision, safety, and anything the boy needs. I want to speak with the mother. She's in the ICU. Visitors are restricted. I want to speak with her, he said again. Same tone, same patience. She deserves to know her son is safe, and she deserves to make a decision about his care. Unless you're planning to make that decision for her while she's still able to make it herself. That landed. Dr. Hale looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she said, I'll see what I can arrange. The ICU was cold and quiet, in the way that places are when the work happening inside them is serious. The beds were separated by curtains. Monitors beeped with soft persistence. Nurses moved between stations without rushing, which somehow made everything feel more grave, not less. Urgency in a place like this came in concentrated doses, not in constant motion. Nia Carter was in the third bay. Min-jae had expected, for reasons he couldn't have fully articulated, someone who looked beaten down. Years of hard work and no support had a way of carving themselves into people's faces. He had seen it enough times. What he saw instead was a woman who looked fierce, even lying in a hospital bed with an oxygen mask pushed down to her chin and an IV in her left arm. She was small, dark-skinned, with natural hair braided back from a face that was flushed with fever and tightened with pain. But her eyes, when they opened and focused on the doorway where he was standing, were sharp, watchful. Not afraid of him, which was unusual. Most people, meeting him for the first time, registered something. Wariness, at minimum. Fear if they knew who he was. Nia Carter looked at him, the way someone looks at a problem they are trying to solve. Dr. Hale had explained the situation. Nia knew who he was in the sense that she knew a stranger had found her son, which meant she had every reason to be wary and no reason to trust him. And her face said she was holding both of those things at once, with a precision that impressed him without his choosing to be impressed. Where is he? Her voice was raw from the oxygen, from the fever, from whatever the last day had cost her. But it was direct. Waiting room, Min-jae said. He's warm. He had something to drink. A breath. Something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly, not yet. Relief would come later, if at all. This was something more immediate. Is he okay? He's scared, Min-jae said. He's been scared for 30 hours, but he's not hurt. Nia closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, they were wet at the corners, but her jaw was set. She wasn't going to cry in front of him. He could see the decision. You found him at the train station, she said. Yes. He took the train by himself. She said it like she was running an autopsy on a decision she'd made, finding the point where something had gone wrong. I told him if he was ever scared, take the train to the hospital. He listened, Min-jae said. She looked at him steadily. Who are you? Not a question, an assessment. My name is Kang Min-jae, he said. I have a legitimate business presence in this city. I also have the other kind of presence. You should know both things. He watched her absorb that. The fever gave her cheeks a high color and her breath was audible, effortful, but her thinking was clearly not impaired. She was measuring him. You want to take my son, she said. I'm offering to supervise him until you're well enough to leave this hospital. The alternative the hospital is working with involves DCFS. Something moved across her face. Fast, controlled, gone. Fear. The specific fear of a parent who has heard those letters before, maybe not in application to herself, but in the world she worked in, caring for children who'd been through what those letters sometimes meant. Why? She said. He thought about giving her a clean, uncomplicated answer. He had several available. Business reasons. Responsibility. Civic obligation. Any of them would have been acceptable, and none of them would have been true, and the woman in front of him, despite the oxygen mask and the IV and the fever, was the kind of person who would know the difference. I found him standing alone in a blizzard, Min-jae said. I don't have a better reason than that. Nia Carter looked at him for a long time. Outside the curtained bay, the ICU went on doing its work. Monitors beeped. A nurse spoke quietly into a phone at the station. Snow was still hitting the high windows in gusts. If anything happens to him, she said. Anything. I will find a way to make you regret it. I don't care who you are. Min-jae looked at her. Nothing will happen to him, he said. Another long moment. Then she said, I want to see him first. They brought Malik to the ICU with Dr. Hale present, and a nurse standing just inside the doorway with the careful positioning of someone ready to intervene. The moment Malik saw his mother in the bed, he stopped walking, the way children stop when what they're seeing doesn't match what they expected. And Min-jae saw the boy's face cycle through several things in quick succession: shock, fear, the specific confusion of a child who has never seen a parent vulnerable. Then Nia said, "Come here, baby." And something in Malik broke open and he crossed the remaining distance to the bed at something between a walk and a run, and Nia pulled him in with her free arm, the arm without the IV, and held him with the kind of grip that said she wasn't letting go. Fever and oxygen equipment and hospital setting and everything else be damned. Minji stepped back to the doorway. He didn't look away. He wasn't sentimental about it. Watching it didn't move him in the way it would have moved other people. Or if it did, he wouldn't have been able to name the feeling. But he watched it. The mother and the boy. The way Malik was shaking, finally letting himself shake, because the person who made shaking safe was here and holding him. The way Nia was talking to him in a low voice that Min-jae couldn't hear but didn't need to. He turned and walked back to the waiting room. The penthouse on the 42nd floor of the River North building was not a place designed with children in mind. Min-jae had understood this in an abstract way before, and he understood it in a concrete way now as he watched Malik Carter stand in the main foyer and look at the space with an expression that was somewhere between awe and wariness. It was 11:30 at night. They had left the hospital after a second conversation with Nia, briefer, more logistical, and a conversation with Dr. Hale about what documentation would satisfy the hospital and what visits would be permitted and when. Min-jae had made 2 phone calls from the car, both brief. By the time the Escalade pulled into the parking structure beneath the building, the necessary arrangements were already in motion. Seo-jun, who managed the household and had been with Min-jae since before the building existed, was waiting in the foyer when the elevator opened. She was a Korean woman in her mid-40s with a face that remained carefully expressionless in almost any situation and had the particular composure of someone who had, over the years, been asked to manage many things that fell outside standard household duties without comment or complaint. She looked at Malik. She looked at Min-jae. She did not ask any questions. "The East guest room," Min-jae said. She nodded. "It's ready." Min-jae looked down at Malik, who was still holding the oversized coat, which he'd been carrying folded over his arms since they left the hospital. "Are you hungry?" Malik looked at him. "A little." "Seo-jun will get you something, then you sleep." "Is my mom going to be okay?" The question was direct in the way children's questions are direct. No preamble, no hedging, just the thing they needed to know, asked plainly. Min-jae looked at the boy. He thought about the several versions of an answer available to him, the reassuring ones, the carefully qualified ones. "She's sick," he said. "She's being taken care of. That's what I know right now." Malik nodded slowly, like he was evaluating the answer and deciding it was honest enough to accept. "Okay," he said. Soo-min was asleep, Min-jae checked. His daughter was 7 years old, which meant she was the same age as Malik. A coincidence that had registered when Malik told him his age in the car, but that he hadn't allowed himself to think about too directly. She slept in a room that was the color of soft gray, with a bookshelf that took up most of one wall, and a closet full of things she loved, and a nightlight shaped like a moon that cast a pale silver circle on the ceiling. He stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at her. His daughter, his blood. The one thing in his life that had never been complicated, not because she didn't make things complicated, she made things enormously complicated just by existing, just by being the one piece of the world he was afraid to lose, but because the feeling itself was simple. He loved her in the plain, unqualified way that didn't need explaining. He pulled her door closed softly and walked to his own room. He didn't sleep for a long time. He lay on his back in the dark and thought about the meeting with Sorokin's people and the fractures he'd observed in their organization. He thought about his captains, Park and the others, and the quarterly reports that were due at the end of the week. He thought about a deal in Rotterdam that had complications developing that would require his personal attention. He thought about Malik Carter, standing at a train station in a blizzard with bare hands and a cartoon backpack and an inadequate coat, holding himself very still with the specific stillness of a child who has decided that falling apart is not allowed. He had seen that stillness before, in a photograph of himself taken when he was 9 years old in Incheon, standing outside an apartment building in winter clothing that was not enough for the cold. He had looked exactly that still. He had been holding himself the same way. The way you hold yourself when staying together is the only choice left. He stared at the ceiling. The penthouse was quiet. Outside, beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago lay under its white coat of snow. The city lights blurred and refracted through the storm, orange and white and gold, everything soft-edged and strange under the weight of the weather. Somewhere in the East guest room, Malik Carter was asleep. Somewhere across the city, in an ICU at Chicago General, Nia Carter was sleeping with a fever of 103.4 degrees and oxygen tubes and an IV and the knowledge that her son was with a man she had every reason not to trust. Min-jae didn't know yet what the morning would bring. He didn't know the full size of what he had stepped into, standing at that train station entrance, looking at a small shape standing too still in the dark. He had made decisions tonight. The offer to the hospital, the conversation with Nia, the drive through the city, without calculating the full downstream cost, which was unusual for him. He calculated costs. It was what he did. It was how he survived. He hadn't calculated these. He would start doing that tomorrow. But lying in the dark with the snow against the windows and the city going on below, he couldn't identify the calculation that would have produced a different result. The boy had been standing there. He had stopped. Those two facts preceded all other facts, and they didn't leave room for a version of the night that looked different from the one that had actually happened. He closed his eyes. Sleep didn't come for a long time. When it did, it was thin and restless and full of things he couldn't remember clearly when morning arrived, except for one image that stayed with him into waking. A boy standing in the snow, not Malik. Himself, at 9 years old, holding himself still, waiting for something that was a very long time away. Morning arrived with pale winter light through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the sound of something he didn't recognize for a moment. A sound that was not part of his regular mornings, not part of any morning he'd had in this apartment for the 4 years he'd lived here. A child's voice. Then a second child's voice. He was up before he consciously decided to be, pulling on clothes and moving toward the sound with the automatic urgency of a man whose threat response was always calibrated to high. He made it to the kitchen doorway and stopped. Soo-min was at the kitchen table in her school clothes, which meant she'd been up for a while. She was sitting across from Malik, who was wearing what appeared to be clothes Seo-jun had sourced from somewhere overnight. They fit approximately, not perfectly, a sweatshirt and track pants that were close enough to his size to be comfortable. Between them on the table was a half-eaten bowl of cereal, 2 glasses of juice, and a box of crayons that had clearly come from Soo-min's room. They were drawing. Soo-min was explaining something about her drawing with the detailed intensity children bring to explanations of their own artwork, and Malik was listening with the focused seriousness of someone who has been asked a question and is taking the responsibility seriously. As Min-jae watched, Soo-min slid a piece of paper across the table toward Malik and pointed at something and said something, and Malik picked up a crayon, blue, and added a line to the drawing. Soo-min nodded, apparently satisfied. Seo-jun was at the counter making coffee, and she looked at Min-jae in the doorway with the expression she used for everything. Neutral, present, complete. She poured a cup and set it on the counter without a word. Min-jae stood in the doorway. He thought about the meeting with Victor Sorokin's people. He thought about Rotterdam and the complications. He thought about his captains and the quarterly reports and the operational decisions that were stacking up, waiting for his attention the way they always waited. He looked at the 2 7-year-olds at his kitchen table, drawing on pieces of paper in morning light, the city white and quiet outside the windows. He walked in and picked up the coffee. "What are you drawing?" he asked. Soo-min looked up at him with the direct, clear-eyed assessment of a child who is perpetually evaluating her father for signs of mood. Then she looked at the paper. "A house," she said. "But Malik said houses don't have to look like that." She pointed at his drawing. "He's drawing an apartment, because that's where he lives." Malik looked at Min-jae over the table. Not a defensive look. Not scared. Just present, meeting Min-jae's eyes with the same directness he'd shown at the train station. The same quality of looking that said this was a child who had grown up learning to read situations fast. "My mom's apartment," Malik said carefully. "On Cicero." "I know," Min-jae said. Something shifted in the boy's face. Not much, but a little. Min-jae drank his coffee and looked out at the snow-covered city, and thought about what came next, and the fact that he had no clean idea of what that was. His phone was already buzzing on the counter with the first of what would be many messages from people who needed things from him. The Empire was awake. It was always awake. It didn't wait for him to be ready. It never had. He looked at Malik's drawing of the apartment on Cicero. He picked up the phone. The day was beginning, and somewhere across the city in an ICU room, a woman with a 103-degree fever was waking up, and her first thought would be about her son. And Min-jae didn't know it yet, but that woman, that fierce, broke, stubborn, exhausted woman who had looked at him from a hospital bed and said, "I will find a way to make you regret it," was about to start pulling the pieces of his carefully constructed life apart in ways that no rival syndicate, no federal investigation, no competing empire had ever managed. Not on purpose. That was the thing that would keep him off balance. She wasn't going to do it on purpose. She was just going to be exactly who she was, and that, it turned out, was the one thing Kang Min-jae had never learned to defend against. The call came at 8:52 in the morning. He was in his office off the main hall, door closed, working through the first of the messages that had piled up overnight, when Park Dae-won knocked twice and entered without waiting. That alone told Min-jae something. Park knocked before entering. Always. 2 knocks was the signal they'd developed over 11 years that meant this is important and it can't wait, as opposed to 1 knock, which meant when you have a moment, and 3 knocks, which meant something is on fire right now. 2 knocks. Important, can't wait. Not a crisis? Not yet. "Seoul is on the line," Park said. "Jin-ho." Min-jae looked up. His uncle, Kang Jin-ho, had not called him in 4 months. His uncle did not call him about small things. His uncle, who sat at the center of the Korean branch of the organization the way a spider sits at the center of a web, called when the web was moving in ways that needed Min-jae's attention. "Give me 5 minutes," Min-jae said. Park nodded and left without closing the door, which meant he was staying within earshot, which meant Park's read on the call was more serious than his expression had let on. Min-jae put down what he was working on. He thought about the Sorkin meeting, about the fractures he'd identified, about a man named Demyan touching his watch. He thought about Malik Carter in the kitchen, drawing an apartment on Cicero. He picked up the secure phone. "Uncle," he said. His uncle's voice came through the line from 12 time zones away, and it was the voice of a man who did not call to deliver good news, and what he said in the next 4 minutes would reorder every calculation Min-jae had been running since the previous night. The storm, it turned out, hadn't ended. It was just changing form. The call from Seoul lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Min-jae knew the duration because he was looking at the phone when he ended it, and the timer on the secure line was still running, and the number sat there, 411, in the way that certain numbers sit after certain conversations, not as data, but as a marker. Before this number, after this number. Kang Jin-ho's voice had been measured. It was always measured. His uncle had not raised his voice in Min-jae's memory, not once in 35 years, which was not a sign of restraint, but of something colder. A man who had long ago concluded that volume was for people who weren't sure they were being taken seriously. The message was simple. Victor Sorokin hadn't sent Demyan to the Meridian Tower meeting to negotiate. He'd sent Demyan to take the measure of Min-jae's attention, to see where his eyes were, to see if the rumors were true, that the Dragon of Chicago was distracted, that something had shifted in his priorities, that the man who had held the city's underworld in careful, ruthless balance for 8 years was no longer fully present in the way that mattered. The rumors apparently had originated inside Min-jae's own organization. "Someone in your house is talking," Jin-ho had said. Not angry, just factual, the way a doctor describes a diagnosis. Sorokin knows about the child. He knows about the hospital. He knows you left the Meridian Tower meeting and picked up a boy off the street and brought him to your home. A pause. He is drawing conclusions. Min-jae had asked which conclusions. "That you are becoming someone easier to deal with," Jin-ho said. "Whether that is true or not is irrelevant. What matters is that he believes it." The call ended there. Min-jae sat with the phone in his hand for 30 seconds after he ended the call. Not thinking. Just letting the information settle into its proper place, the way you let sediment settle in water before you try to read what's at the bottom. Then he opened the office door. Park was in the hallway, arms crossed, exactly where Min Jae had expected him to be. He looked at his boss and waited. "Bring me Chen," Min Jae said, "and Reyes, my office. 1 hour." Park's jaw moved slightly. Not surprise, exactly. More like the adjustment a person makes when something confirms a suspicion they'd been hoping was wrong. Both of them. Both of them. Park nodded and left. Min Jae went back to his desk and sat down and did not pick up any of the other phones and did not look at any of the other messages. He sat in the specific stillness he used when he needed to think, his hands flat on the desk surface, his eyes on the middle distance, and he ran the arithmetic. Someone in his house was talking to Sorokin's people. The pool of people who knew about last night, about Malik, about the hospital, about the decision he'd made at the Blue Line station, was not large. The car crew, Seo Jun, Park. The hospital staff were irrelevant. They didn't move in circles where Sorokin's people would hear things. That left the car crew, which meant Sketch, which meant the newest member of Min Jae's close circle, the one he'd taken on 6 months ago on a recommendation from a man named Torres, who ran the West Side operation. Torres, who had been increasingly difficult to reach since the fourth quarter of last year. Torres, who had attended 2 meetings Min Jae now suspected had not been purely social. He sat with that and let it become solid. Chen arrived first. Marcus Chen was 41, half Chinese, half black, built like a man who had started lifting weights in prison and never stopped. He ran the financial architecture of Min Jae's legitimate businesses, the restaurant group, the real estate holdings, the logistics company, with an attention to detail that bordered on obsessive and had kept them clean through 2 federal investigations that had gotten close enough to be uncomfortable. He came in without being asked to sit, because Marcus Chen did not sit in rooms where he was summoned unless explicitly invited, a habit that Min Jae had never bothered to correct because it was useful. "You heard," Min Jae said. It wasn't a question, and Chen didn't treat it like one. "Park told me enough." He looked at the desk. "How serious?" "Serious enough that I'm having this meeting." Elena Reyes came in 2 minutes later, pulling the door shut behind her. She was 38, Colombian, and she ran the street-level operations on the south and west sides with a precision that made her the most effective captain in the organization and the most difficult to manage, because effectiveness at that level came with a particular kind of confidence that did not always defer gracefully. She was already talking before she was fully through the door. "I heard something last night," she said. "After the Meridian meeting, word coming back from—" "Sit down, Elena." She stopped, looked at him, sat. The 3 of them in the room together was unusual. Min Jae ran his organization in compartments, and the captains knew their own compartments and not others. Having Chen and Reyes in the same space at the same time meant the walls between compartments were coming down, and both of them understood that without needing it, explained. "Someone in the close circle is carrying information to Sorokin," Min Jae said. "It's recent. It's specific. It concerns my personal movements." Reyes's expression didn't change. She had a face that was good at not changing, which was part of why she was where she was. But her eyes moved, a small, quick movement toward Chen and back, and that movement told Min Jae something. "You have a name," he said. Reyes looked at him steadily. "I have a suspicion." "Tell me." "It's not Sketch," she said. "I know you're thinking Sketch because he's new and because Torres vouched for him, and Torres has been making me nervous for 6 months. But I ran Sketch myself, before Park brought him on. I know his background in a way Torres doesn't know I know it." She paused. "If there's a line running to Sorokin from inside this operation, it's older than 6 months. It's been running longer." Silence in the room. Chen was looking at his hands. "Marcus," Min Jae said. Chen looked up. "I don't have a name," he said, "but I've been seeing irregularities in the communication logs from the Meridian Tower building's server relay for the past 4 months. Small things. The kind of things that look like noise until they don't." He met Min Jae's eyes. "I should have brought it to you sooner. I was building the picture before I said anything. I didn't want to bring you half a picture. How complete is the picture now?" 80%. "The other 20 is the name," Chen said. Min Jae looked at him. "I need 3 days," Chen said. Min Jae thought about what his uncle had said, about Sorokin drawing conclusions, about a man who believed the Dragon of Chicago was becoming easier to deal with. "You have 2, he said. He found out about the apartment on Cicero at 10 in the morning. Not from Malik, from a report Park put on his desk, quiet, efficient, no editorializing, that contained what his people had found when he'd sent them to check on the address the boy had mentioned. The report was 3 pages. Min Jae read it once, set it down, and read it again. Nia Carter had been living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a building that should have been condemned 18 months ago, according to city housing records that the landlord had successfully delayed acting on through a combination of paperwork and the specific kind of legal maneuvering available to people who owned enough property in the right neighborhoods to make enforcement inconvenient. The apartment itself was clean. That was in the report too, noted by the man Min Jae had sent to check it, who had let himself in and used the word immaculate, which was not a word Min Jae's people typically reached for. The apartment was immaculate, and it contained almost nothing of monetary value, and it contained a great deal of evidence of a woman making everything she had stretch as far as it would go. Library books on the kitchen table, a child's drawings on the refrigerator, nursing textbooks stacked neatly by the couch, a grocery list on a notepad near the phone with items crossed off in the specific pattern of someone who shops in careful increments. The financial information in the report was not good. Rent 3 months behind. Utilities on a payment plan that was itself behind. Medical debt from Malik's emergency appendectomy 14 months ago, $11,000 in collections. Credit cards at their limits, a savings account with $412 in it. The second page of the report contained something else. Min Jae had asked his people to look into who Nia Carter was. This was standard. He did not bring people into his orbit, even temporarily, even involuntarily, without knowing who they were. What they found was a woman who had come to Chicago from Memphis at 23 with a nursing degree, and a son who was not yet 2 years old, and a father for that son who had left before the boy was born and had not been part of the picture since. She had worked at Chicago General for 5 years. She had been recommended for promotion twice. Twice the promotions had gone to other people. Her supervisor's reviews described her as exceptional. Her employment file contained a note from 8 months ago, a formal complaint against a hospital administrator for improper scheduling practices, an accusation that Nia had filed on behalf of several nurses, not herself alone. The complaint had been investigated and dismissed. After the dismissal, her hours had increased. Min Jae set the report down. He thought about the woman in the hospital bed, flushed with fever, pulling her son against her with one arm, holding herself together with the other. He picked up the report and put it in his desk drawer and locked it. At 12:30, he went to check on Malik. Soo Min had school in the afternoons, a private school 3 blocks away that she attended with a security detail that was dressed to look like nothing in particular. Seo Jun had taken her at 11, which meant the apartment was quieter than it had been in the morning. Min Jae found Malik in the living room, sitting on the floor near the window with his back against the couch, his knees pulled up, looking out at the city. The cartoon backpack was beside him. He was holding his phone, a child's phone, the kind with parental controls and a cracked screen, and it was clearly not getting a signal or not finding what he was looking for. The Wi-Fi password is on the router, Min Jae said. The router is in the hallway by the kitchen. Malik looked at him. I was trying to call my mom. Hospital phones in the ICU are restricted until 2 o'clock. Seo Jun has a number for the nursing station. She'll call for you at 2. The boy processed this. Something in his face tightened and then released, the way a child's face works through disappointment when they've learned that showing it doesn't help. Is she the same? He asked. From this morning? Min Jae had called the hospital at 9. Nia's fever was down to 100 to 2.1. The attending had used the words cautiously optimistic, which Min Jae knew from experience meant things were not worse, which was not the same as things being better, but in an ICU it was the better version of the available news. The fever is lower, he said. That's good. Malik nodded. He looked back at the window. From the 42nd floor, the city was a grid of white and gray and black, the snow on the rooftops and streets still thick from the night before, the sky the color of old concrete. Malik looked at it without the awe he'd shown last night. He was past awe. He was looking at it the way you look at something you need to orient yourself in, trying to find the coordinates of a place you knew in a landscape that looked different from up here. I can see the hospital from here, Malik said. Not a question. More like he was deciding whether it was true. Probably, Min Jae said. Which direction? Min Jae crossed to the window and stood beside him and pointed south and west. Malik followed the direction with his eyes, searching. I can't see it, the boy said. It's too far. But it's there. Yes. Malik was quiet. Then, she's going to be okay. Minjay looked at the boy's profile, the set of his jaw, the specific quality of it. Not a question, not wishful thinking, but a statement that functioned as a command, as if saying it with enough certainty could make it so. Yes, Minjay said. She's going to be okay. He said it without hedging, which was not his habit. He said it because the boy needed it said, and because Minjay was willing, in this specific moment, to make the truth catch up with the statement rather than the other way around. The afternoon brought 3 problems. The first was a call from his Rotterdam contact confirming that the complications with the European shipment were not logistics issues, as originally reported, but something more pointed. A specific interdiction that had the markers of coordinated law enforcement rather than bad luck. Someone had given information. The Rotterdam operation was paused. $200,000 was in limbo. The people waiting on that shipment were not patient people. The second was a text from Elena Reyes that read, Torres went dark. Phone off. Last ping was 6 hours ago. Airport. Minjay read it twice and then put the phone down and stood at his office window looking at the city for a full minute. Torres. He thought about the recommendation for sketch. He thought about the communication logs Chen had flagged. He thought about the specific things Sorokin would have needed to know to send Demyan to that meeting with that posture. Not to negotiate, but to assess. Torres had been in the meeting 3 months ago where Minjay had talked about the Meridian Tower gathering. Torres had known the date and time. The third problem arrived in person. His name was Hector Fuentes, and he ran the street enforcement for the South Side, and he came to the penthouse at 4 o'clock with Park's permission, which meant Park had evaluated him and decided the visit couldn't wait until a better time. He was 32, compact, with eyes that moved fast and hands that stayed still. A combination Minjay had always read as someone who had trained himself to manage what showed. He sat across from Minjay in the office, with his hands on his knees, and he said what he'd come to say without warming up to it. There are people saying you've gone soft, Fuentes said. Not to me. Around me. The kind of talking that happens when people think I'm not listening. Who? 3 names I know, maybe more I don't. He listed them. 2 lieutenants, 1 mid-level soldier. Men who had been in the organization long enough to have opinions about how it should run, not long enough to have the standing to act on those opinions without cover from someone higher. And the cover, Minjay said. Fuentes looked at him. That's the part I don't have yet. Minjay held his gaze. Get it? Yes, sir. Fuentes started to stand. One more thing. Minjay kept his voice level. The talking that's happening. What specifically are they saying? Fuentes sat back down. He was weighing something. Minjay could see it, the micro-calculation of how much to say. Then he said it. They're saying the kid changed you, the black kid. They're saying you brought him here and now you're making decisions like a man who's afraid of losing something, which is different from making decisions like a man who has something to lose. Silence. Is there a difference? Minjay said. Not a question. To them? Yeah. Fuentes met his eyes. To me? A pause. I've been watching you for 4 years. I know which one you've always been. Minjay looked at him for a moment. That's all. Fuentes left. Minjay sat alone in the office with the winter light going flat outside the windows and 3 problems sitting in front of him with a 4th developing in the shape of his own organization's confidence. And he thought about what it cost to be seen as something you weren't and what it cost to be seen as exactly what you were. He thought about Malik's face at the window, looking south and west toward a hospital he couldn't see. He thought about a report locked in his desk drawer and the woman it described, a woman who had filed a complaint on behalf of other people and watched it get used against her, who had worked herself into a hospital bed trying to keep a promise to a boy who was 7 years old and already old in the specific ways that children become old when no one is carrying the weight for them. He unlocked the desk drawer. He made a call. It took 6 minutes and the transfer of a number that he spoke quietly and only once. And at the end of 6 minutes, the arrears on Nia Carter's rent were paid. Not from any account traceable to him directly. Clean money, moving through a channel that Chen had built for exactly this kind of purpose. Emerging on the other side as a cashier's check from a company that managed properties in 4 states and had no obvious connection to Kang Min-jae. He made 2 more calls. The medical debt from the appendectomy, $11,000. sitting with a collections agency that had been calling Nia's number twice a week for 14 months, was bought at a discount and zeroed out. The utilities were brought current. He did this methodically, without ceremony, the way he did most things. He was not performing generosity. He was solving a problem that bothered him, which was different. He did not think about whether she would find out. He should have thought about that. 2 days later, she found out. Min-jae was at the hospital for the afternoon visit. He had been bringing Malik every afternoon, waiting in the family area while the boy spent his 40 minutes with his mother, using the time to handle calls he couldn't make from the penthouse. He had settled into a routine of sorts with this, had learned which corner of the family waiting area had the best signal and the least foot traffic, had learned the names of 2 of the nurses by the 3rd day, because knowing the names of people in critical positions was something he did reflexively. He was on a call with Chen. The 2 days were up, the picture was complete, the name was on the table. When Dr. Hale appeared in the doorway of the family area and looked at him with an expression that said she had been asked to deliver a message and had reservations about doing it. Min-jae ended the call. "She wants to see you," Dr. Hale said. "Now. Alone." He handed his phone to Park, who was in the hallway, and followed Dr. Hale to the ICU. Nia Carter was sitting up in bed. The oxygen mask was gone, moved to a nasal cannula that sat just beneath her nose, thin tubes running across her cheeks. Her color was better. The fever was down. She was still in a hospital bed with an IV and monitors and all the equipment that said she was not well. But the difference between the woman he'd first seen 4 nights ago and the woman looking at him now was measurable and significant. She was looking at him like she was about to have a fight. He pulled a chair from the wall and sat down because standing would make the conversation about height. And this was not a conversation about height. "The rent," she said. He met her eyes. "The medical debt." Her voice was controlled. It took effort. He could hear the effort in it, the careful management of a register that wanted to be louder. "The electric bill. The gas." "Yes," he said. "I didn't ask you to do that." "No, I didn't ask you for anything," she said. "I asked you to keep my son safe. That's all. Your son is safe. And now I owe you." The last word came out with a specific force, a weight she'd clearly been working up to. "I owe you money I have no way of repaying, and I owe you for Malik, and I owe you for—" "You don't owe me anything," he said. "That's not how it works." She was looking at him with something that wasn't anger exactly, or wasn't only anger, something underneath it, something more careful and more afraid. "I've seen how this works. You do something for someone, and then they belong to you. I've seen it. I've treated the people it's happened to." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not going to be one of those people." The room was quiet except for the monitors. Min-jae looked at her. He thought about giving her the version of this that was simplest. The version where he said it was nothing, it was done, it didn't matter. The version where he managed her the way he managed most situations, with the least information necessary to produce the right outcome. He didn't give her that version. "When I was 9 years old," he said, "I was standing outside an apartment building in Incheon in a winter coat that wasn't enough for the cold. My father had been gone for 2 years. My mother was working 3 jobs and still losing ground." He kept his voice level, the way he kept everything level. "There was a man in our building. He owned a restaurant. He had no reason to care about us. He came to our door one night and he handed my mother an envelope. He didn't say it was help. He said he'd made too much that week and he didn't want it to go to waste." "That's just stimatis." He paused. She didn't take it the first time. She argued with him for 10 minutes in the hallway. He stood there and let her argue. Then he left the envelope on the floor outside our door and went back to his apartment. Nia was looking at him. Her jaw had loosened slightly. Not much, but a little. "She picked it up," Min-jae said. "She had to. And it kept us in that apartment for 3 more months, which was long enough for things to get less impossible." He looked at her directly. "I'm not asking you to become someone who depends on me. I'm telling you that the man outside your door in the hallway is gone already. He's not waiting to be repaid." Silence. Nia Carter looked at him for a long time with the complicated expression of a woman who was trying to hold on to an argument that had just lost some of its structural support. Her eyes were wet at the corners again, and again she was making the decision not to let it go further than that, and he was beginning to recognize this as one of her particular forms of dignity. Not the absence of feeling, but the governance of it. Why? She said. Quiet. Not accusing this time. Actually asking. He thought about several answers. Your son reminded me of myself, he said. At an age when I needed someone to stop, and nobody did. The monitors beeped. Somewhere beyond the curtained bay, someone was being rolled past on a gurney, wheels squeaking against the floor. Nia looked at her hands. Then she looked at him. He's drawing with your daughter, she said. Malik, he told me. Something shifted in her voice, the edge of it softening in a way that didn't sound like defeat, but like the relaxing of a stance that had been held too long. He said she showed him her bookshelf and asked him if he could read, and when he said yes, she gave him 3 books. She does that, Minjae said. She sounds like a good kid. She's too smart for most rooms, he said, including mine. Something moved in Nia's face. Not quite a smile. The anterior motion of one, the thing that comes before a smile, that acknowledges the possibility. She pressed her lips together against it. I'm going to pay you back, she said. Everything. When I'm out of here and working again. Minjae looked at her. He didn't say what he was thinking, that the number she'd be paying back on a nurse's salary, given the debt load she'd been carrying before he touched any of it, was a number that would take years. That years of obligation was a different kind of trap than the one she was afraid of. He also didn't say that he had no intention of collecting. He said, okay. She looked at him, reading the word, reading the space around it, deciding how much to trust what the space contained. Okay, she said back. He was in the elevator going down when his phone buzzed. Park. 2 words, Chen confirmed. Minjae stared at the message. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. He stepped out into the hospital's ground floor, into the noise and the light and the smell of industrial disinfectant and coffee from the vending machines. He stood in the middle of the lobby for a moment. The name Chen had given him, the name at the center of the picture, the 80% that had become 100%, was not a name from the outer edges of his organization. It was not a foot soldier or a mid-level crew chief with ambitions and a grudge. It was someone Minjae had trusted with the architecture. Someone who had been inside the walls long enough to know where the load-bearing structures were. Someone, he now understood, who had been preparing for this moment for longer than Sorokin had been a problem. Longer than Torres. This had been built quietly over time, and what Sorokin was doing now wasn't the cause of the trouble in Minjae's organization. It was the symptom. The cause was standing somewhere in his own house. Park was waiting by the car outside. Minjae walked toward the exit, and as he walked, he was doing the arithmetic, running the variables, calculating what came next with the cold precision that had kept him alive and in power for 8 years in one of the most hostile operating environments in the world. He had 2 choices. He could move fast, quiet, decisive, the way he'd moved before in situations that required the version of himself he least wanted to need. Contain the damage, cauterize the wound before it bled further. The organization would stabilize. Sorokin would get the message that nothing had changed, that the Dragon of Chicago was still the same animal he'd always been. Or he could take 3 more days, watch the shape of it fully develop, let the person inside his organization believe they had not been found yet, and use that window to see what they were building toward, because a betrayal this patient and this structural wasn't built for money. It was built for something larger, something that required knowing not just Minjae's weaknesses, but his. The name was Park Dae-won. Minjae stood outside the hospital in the February cold, the exit doors sliding shut behind him, and he held that sentence in his mind the way you hold something that has just cut you, carefully, aware of the damage, not yet feeling the full extent of it. Park Dae-won. 11 years. 11 years of the man at his shoulder, 2 steps back, close enough to move if something happened. 11 years of the 2 knocks on the office door and the precise, economical communication and the loyalty that had looked, from every angle Minjae had examined it from, like the real thing. Chen's message was 6 words. But 6 words from Marcus Chen, who had spent 2 days building a picture before he was willing to put a name on it, was the equivalent of a signed confession from anyone else. The car was 30 feet away. Park was standing beside it. Minjae walked toward him. He did this the way he did difficult things, without changing his gait, without changing his expression, without giving the external world any indication that the internal world had just shifted on its axis. This was a skill he had developed young and refined over 20 years. This ability to continue moving in one direction while something catastrophic was happening in the space between his sternum and his spine. He had needed it in interrogation rooms. He had needed it across negotiating tables. He had needed it at funerals for men he had ordered to their deaths, and men who had died for him, and men he had simply failed. He had never needed it walking toward someone he had trusted with everything. Park opened the rear door as Min Jae approached. Standard motion. Practiced. The door swung open, and Park stepped back and looked at Min Jae with the face he always wore in this context. Present, neutral, watchful. Ready. Min Jae stopped. He looked at Park. Park looked back at him. And there, in the space of a second, in the fraction of a second before the professional composure reasserted itself, Min Jae saw it. A flicker. The micro-adjustment of a man who has just recognized that something is different, that the thing he's been managing has reached a stage he wasn't certain would come. Not fear. Something more controlled than fear. Calculation. Min Jae had seen it across negotiating tables for 20 years. He'd just never seen it on this face. "Get in the front," he said. Park's expression didn't change. "Sir?" "Front seat. I'll drive." A pause of 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Min Jae watched Park run the calculation, what the request meant, what the options were, what the correct move was. 3 seconds was too long. It was the duration of a man who was choosing a response rather than having one. "Of course," Park said. He walked around to the passenger side. Min Jae got behind the wheel. The driver, a man named Santos who'd been with the carpool for 2 years, was looking at him from the back seat with the expression of someone who had no idea what was happening and understood that was exactly the right thing not to know. "Santos," Min Jae said. "Get out." Santos got out without a word. He had that kind of sense. Min Jae and Park sat in the idling car outside Chicago General Hospital, while snow fell in slow, indifferent curtains outside the windshield. The heat was running. The wipers moved on their interval setting, steady and mechanical, clearing the glass and letting it fill again. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Min Jae was the one who broke it. "Rotterdam," he said. Park was looking straight ahead. "What about it?" "The interdiction. The coordination markers." Min Jae kept his hands on the wheel, not gripping, just resting. His voice was the same register it always was. Even. Precise. Each word its own weight. Law enforcement doesn't move on a shipment like that based on a tip. They move on it based on pattern intelligence. Pattern intelligence that takes months to build. He paused. Someone gave them the pattern. Silence. "The Meridian Tower," Min Jae continued. Sorokin knowing the specifics of last Tuesday's meeting, knowing the time, the location, who attended. He turned his head and looked at Park's profile. He didn't get that from Torres. Torres knew the date. He didn't know the room configuration. He didn't know who sat where. Park was breathing. Min Jae could hear it, could see the slight rise and fall of his chest. Controlled. Managed. 11 years, Min Jae said. "How long has it been running?" Park turned and looked at him. The face that looked back at Min Jae was one he had been looking at for 11 years. A face he had read in 100 high-pressure situations. A face he had trusted to tell him things that faces didn't always tell. Looking at it now was like looking at a topographical map of a place he thought he knew and finding the elevation markings were all wrong. "4," Park said. One word. Quiet. Without apparent emotion, which was its own kind of answer. A man who had made peace with this moment long ago and was not going to spend it performing remorse he hadn't earned. 4 years. Min Jae absorbed this. He did not slam his hand against the wheel. He did not raise his voice. He sat with the number and let it do its work and measured the damage the way you measure structural damage, systematically, from the load-bearing points outward. 4 years meant the federal investigations that had come close and not closed. It meant 3 operations that had developed complications that at the time had looked like bad luck. It meant a man in Rotterdam who was currently explaining to associates why a $200,000 shipment had disappeared into the hands of law enforcement, and the explanation he was giving them was not the true one. It meant the conversations in the Meridian Tower. The sole briefings that Min Jae had handled from his office while Park stood in the hallway within earshot, as he always stood, as Min Jae had always allowed because Park was the one person he had stopped accounting for the way he accounted for everyone else. "Who owns you?" Min Jae said. Park looked at him. It's complicated. It isn't. A pause. Sorokin isn't the main entity. He's one line. There are others. Federal. Park looked at the windshield. I'm not going to confirm that here. You're going to confirm it somewhere. Min Jae. Park said the name without the honorific, which he had never done in 11 years, and the effect of it was strange, intimate in a way that landed wrong, like a wrong note in a piece of music you knew well. I'm not your enemy. I never was. What I've been doing, was always moving toward the same end, getting you out of this before it ended you. Min Jae looked at him. There are people who want to put you away for the rest of your life, Park said. His voice was steady, not apologetic, certain, in the way of a man who has spent 4 years constructing a justification and has it memorized. I have been managing the exposure, managing what they get and what they don't. You're still here because of that management. You'd have been indicted 2 years ago without it. He turned to face Min Jae directly. I was protecting you. You were giving them enough to keep them interested without closing the case, Min Jae said, which means they have an open file with 4 years of material in it, and you have 4 years of leverage in both directions. He kept his voice flat. You were protecting yourself. Something moved in Park's face. Not guilt. He was past guilt, had metabolized it into something else, into the conviction that the story he was telling about his own actions was the true one. Min Jae recognized the architecture of it. He had seen it in other men who had done things that required reconstruction. Get out of the car, Min Jae said. Min Jae, get out of the car, Daewon. Park looked at him for one more moment. Then he opened the door and got out into the cold and the snow, and Min Jae sat alone in the idling car and watched him walk away through the rear-view mirror, walking steadily, not looking back, the shape of him diminishing in the gray afternoon light until he turned a corner and was gone. Min Jae sat for 60 seconds. Then he made 3 calls. The first was to Chen. Brief. He spoke 4 sentences and Chen confirmed 4 things, the last of which was the most important. The federal file Park had been feeding was active, had a supervising agent, and had been sitting in a holding pattern for 8 months, waiting on a final piece of evidence that would make the case viable for prosecution. The second call was to Reyes. Lockdown, he said. Full operational pause. Nothing moves, nothing communicates outside secured channels. 2 hours. Reyes didn't ask why. She said, done. The third call he didn't make immediately. He sat with the phone in his hand and he thought about what Park had said. You'd have been indicted 2 years ago. And underneath that, the thing Park hadn't said but that was sitting in the car with Min Jae like a third presence. If they closed the case now, with 4 years of material, the outcome wasn't uncertain. He thought about Soo Min, 7 years old, the bookshelf, the crayon drawings. He thought about Malik Carter at the window, looking south and west toward a hospital he couldn't see but knew was there. He made the third call. The meeting with Chen and Reyes happened at 6 o'clock in a secondary location, not the penthouse, not any space that Park had had access to with regularity. A room above a restaurant in Pilsen that Min Jae held in a name that was 3 corporate entities removed from anything traceable. Chen had a laptop open. Reyes had a coffee she wasn't drinking. The room smelled like old wood in the kitchen 2 floors below. Min Jae stood at the window and did not sit, which told both of them the shape of the meeting before he said anything. The federal file, he said. What's in it? Chen looked at his screen. He had been pulling threads since the earlier call. Financials. Transaction patterns. 3 operational details from Rotterdam, 2 from the South Side work in 2022. A surveillance log from the Meridian Tower with meeting dates, not content. He paused. There are gaps, significant ones. Things Park could have given them and didn't, because he needed the case to stay open, Reyes said. Closed case means he's done being useful. Open case means he keeps his position on both sides. The missing piece, Min Jae said. Chen looked up. Based on the structure of what they have, the pattern they've been building, the missing piece is a direct prosecutable financial link. Something that bypasses the corporate insulation and puts Min Jae's name on a transaction that can't be explained away. He closed the laptop carefully. They don't have it yet. But they know where to look, Min Jae said. Yes. Silence in the room. The rent payments, Min Jae said. The medical debt. The utilities. Chen's expression changed slightly. Not much. Chen's expressions never changed much. But the particular quality of stillness that came over his face said he had already run this calculation and arrived at the same destination. The channel I used is clean, 3 entities deep, but if someone is specifically looking at movement patterns around dates corresponding to... He stopped. Around dates corresponding to my connection with the Carter family, Min-jae said. Chen nodded. Reyes was looking at Min-jae. Her expression was not accusatory. It was the expression of someone who is doing the math in real time and not loving the answer. That's what Park was building toward, she said. He didn't have the financial link. He needed you to make one. Something recent, something outside your normal operation pattern, something that would look like a new exposure. She set down the coffee. He needed you to do something you don't normally do. Min-jae looked at her. The boy, Reyes said quietly. Park knew you'd bring him in. He knew what it would do to your decision-making. He might not have known the specifics of what you do for the mother, but he knew something would move. He's been watching you for 11 years. He knew what you'd do when you stopped at that train station. The room was very quiet. Outside, traffic moved on the street below. A truck passed, its engine sound rising and falling. Somewhere in the restaurant below, something was being moved in the kitchen. A heavy object dragged across a floor. Min-jae thought about standing at the Blue Line entrance, the small shape at the railing, the stillness that had stopped him. He thought about whether Park had known about Malik before the blizzard, whether the information that Nia Carter would be working a double shift that night, a schedule change that had kept her past the point of collapse, a scheduling decision made by an administrator that Nia had previously filed a complaint against, had moved through channels that connected to Park before it reached the hospital floor. He thought about that possibility, and he sat with it, and it was the worst thing he had thought in a long time. Find out, he said to Chen, whether the scheduling change at Chicago General on Tuesday night was organic or engineered. Chen looked at him. He understood what Min-jae was asking. He understood what it meant if the answer was the wrong one. I'll have it tonight. And the family, Min-jae said. He looked at Reyes. I need the Carter family covered. Nia and Malik both. Not connected to me, nothing that shows. But covered. Reyes held his gaze. Already moving. Park isn't dangerous to them directly, Min-jae said. He's not the type, but the people he's been working with may see them as pressure points now that the dynamic is known. I understand, Reyes said. Min-jae nodded. He turned back to the window. What's the move? Chen said. It wasn't pressuring him. Chen didn't pressure. It was simply the next logical sentence in the sequence, the question that had to be asked. Min-jae looked at the dark street below. At the headlights moving through it, each one a person going somewhere, carrying their own weight, navigating by whatever lights they had. The move, as it existed right now, was not one he could make cleanly. The federal file was open. Park was in the wind with 4 years of material and presumably some form of protection. Handlers who would activate certain protocols if contact was lost. Moving against Park directly would trigger those protocols. The file would close, and not in Min-jae's favor. Not moving against Park meant the file stayed open and the final piece was still being sought. Both options led to the same place. Unless... He turned from the window. The legitimate side, he said to Chen. The restaurant group, the real estate, the logistics company. Give me an honest assessment. If the criminal operation stopped existing tomorrow, completely, every part of it, what survives? What's viable? Chen stared at him. Reyes made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Marcus, Min-jae said. The Jabras us, Min-jae. Chen looked at the closed laptop. He was running numbers in his head. Min-jae could see it, the slight movement of his eyes that meant internal calculation. The restaurant group is profitable independent of anything else. The real estate portfolio is solid. Most of it is clean. It was built clean from the beginning. The logistics company would need restructuring, but the infrastructure is real. He paused. They're viable. They were always viable. That was the point of building them that way. If I transferred operational control, Min-jae said, formalized the legitimate side as the primary entity, moved resources, wound down the other operations over a defined period. He looked at Chen. What does the federal file look like in that scenario? Chen was very still. If the wind down was genuine, if it was documented, if the cooperation was... He stopped. Started again. It changes the calculus of the prosecution significantly. A case built over 4 years targeting an active criminal organization looks different when the organization is in documented dissolution. He looked at Min-jae with the expression of a man who is updating a model in real time. The missing financial link becomes less critical. The existing evidence becomes the record of something that no longer exists. Park loses his value, Reyes said slowly. If you're dissolving the operation voluntarily, the open file is no longer the leverage it was. His handler's interest level drops. She was working it out as she spoke. He's not useful to them as a conduit into an active operation if the operation is active for... She looked at Min-jae. How long are we talking? 18 months, Min-jae said. Maybe less. Silence. Reyes stood up. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Not in 4 years of working together, not in the hard situations, not in the situations that had required her to be harder than the hardest person in the room. What was on her face now was something more complicated than professional evaluation. You're serious, she said. Yes. You're talking about walking away from... I know what I'm talking about. Min-jae. She said his name the way Park had, without title. But the effect was different. It landed like something she was handing him rather than taking. This organization is 200 people. Its territory and relationships and infrastructure that took 20 years to... I know what it took, he said. The room was very quiet again. Chen had not moved. He was watching Min-jae with the focused attention of a man who is trying to determine if what he's seen is a crisis or a conclusion. Min-jae looked at both of them. Get Chen's answer about the scheduling change, he said.